right. Well, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Welcome to our event today. I'm Julie Maldonado and have the great honor and privilege to serve as the co-director of the Rising Voices Center for Indigenous and Earth Sciences. And we are absolutely thrilled to welcome everyone to this special online event today featuring COVID-19 and climate change, understanding place, history, and Indigenous sovereignty and emergency response with Ciara Green, Leslie Okea, and Jasmine Nyash. And so just to give you a little background, today's event is co-sponsored by the Rising Voices Center for Indigenous and Earth Sciences and the Natural Hazards Center. And the focus of our time here today is to share teaching modules that are focused on tribal and Indigenous communities' experiences of COVID-19 and climate change, including ethical considerations, case studies, and narratives that are integrated into the curricula. And so to see the full curricula, I'm going to put this link in the chat here and I'll also be sharing that a couple of times throughout our conversation. And huge thanks to the Natural Hazards Center team who worked with us in getting this fully posted up through their site. So big gratitude to that team. So we have just real quick a brief background on Rising Voices for any new friends coming into this space. So the Rising Voices Center for Indigenous and Earth Sciences is housed within the National Center for Atmospheric Research, which is in turn managed by the University Corporation for Atmospheric Research in Boulder, Colorado. And we acknowledge that NCAR is in the traditional territory of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute peoples, and many more who have come through those homelands. And as many of you know, the Rising Voices Center facilitates intercultural, relational-based approaches for understanding and adapting to extreme weather and climate events, to climate variability and climate change. Rising Voices acknowledges the inherent value of Indigenous knowledge systems and Indigenous science, adaptive practices and processes, honoring them equally with earth sciences. And at its core, Rising Voices aims to advance science through collaborations that bring Indigenous and earth sciences into partnership, supports adaptive and resilient communities through sharing scientific capacity, and provides opportunities for Indigenous students and early career scientists through scientific and community mentoring. And Calvin, if we can get the slides back up and go over to slide 2, thanks. And so our heartfelt gratitude to the Rising Voices Steering Committee, Council, funders, and many, many more in the community who make this program and process possible and really make Rising Voices what it is. And next slide. Throughout today's event, I'm going to put a link here. We ask that you respect and honor the Rising Voices ethics guidelines. I have that link for you in the chat to the full guidelines. The guidelines provide a starting point and considerations for good practices when working in intercultural spaces. And if we can go to the next slide, Kelvin, thanks. And then I'm going to put a second link in for you that are the Rising Voices values. And so Rising Voices holds these values, which we uphold here and throughout all of our events and programming. And so we encourage you to go to those links on your own time as well to follow along. And so as part of our virtual platform today, we are offering live captioning, which you have the option to turn on or off as you wish. And then during the Q&A portion later on, please use either the raise hand function or you may type your question in the chat. And so if we come to your question, I'll call on you and you'll be able to unmute at that time to ask your question. Otherwise, we do ask that you stay on mute just to eliminate any background noise, like my dog is barking in the background right now, so I hope that you cannot hear that. And so this intro and the presentation portions of the event are being recorded, and the recording will be turned off for the Q&A portion of it. And it's now my great pleasure and honor to introduce our speakers today, who will in turn introduce themselves more fully. Again, we have Ciara Green, Leslie Okea, and Jasmine Nyash with us. They are the developers and authors of the teaching modules focused on tribal and Indigenous communities' experiences of COVID-19 and climate change. And the set basically includes 9 modules within the curricula where modules 1 to 3 set the foundation for understanding the intersectionality of colonial systems, climate change, COVID-19, and community, and working with Indigenous sovereignty. And then modules 4 to 9 are place-based curricula, with modules 4 to 6 focused on Nimiipuu place-based identities, preparation and adaptation, and resilience. And then modules 7 to 9 focus on Hawaiian place-based identities, emergency management, and sustainability. And so a reminder to see the full curricula, I'm going to put that link in the chat again. And then if we can go to the next slide, Kelvin, and going to turn it over to Dr. Ikea. Thank you.
Aloha mai kākou. Thank you, Julie. I'm Leslie Iaukea. I'm a Kanaka Maoli, or a Native Hawaiian from the island of Maui in Hawaii. And I'm also part of the Rising Voices Ohana. I just want to thank first the Rising Voices Center for Indigenous and Earth Sciences and the National Hazard Center for this opportunity. What you will see in this presentation is that our curriculum follows a flow. And it is because in order to understand the need to change the pedagogy and formation of curriculum, we first must understand the colonial history of our place. In a shift to reclaim and reconceptualize culture through ancestral knowledge, we shift the paradigm and place ourselves as a Native people in the center to create a culture-based curriculum. We find that this type of curriculum allows for a better understanding of the connection between man and environment, or better yet, we begin to understand weather and weather disturbances. This type of curriculum offers a new way of looking at solutions to climate change and sustainability issues that our ancestors knew of generations ago. Each of these models uses literature, case studies, and references, and you're looking at, I believe, module 7 for one of my modules. And then it looks to Indigenous knowledge to bring an Indigenous philosophy to the discussion where the protocol is introduced, a different worldview of weather is explained, and ancestral knowledge can be explained through the elements of reference. And that would be moon phases, etc. But I focus on the moon phases. In looking at module 7, I focus on place-based identities and understanding an oral culture through ancestral knowledge. The learning objectives put in place is to understand that connection between people and the elements of reference, to understand the solar system with the different phases of the moon, to connect the different moon phases with weather disturbances, traditional knowledge, and people, and to develop an understanding of an oral culture through ancestral knowledge. We start each class in the cultural protocol so that the students are grounded and focused. I connect the students with the elements of reference, and in this example, I focus on the moon phases. Each phase describes a weather trait that can be specific to a pattern of weather each month. It is in this space of understanding that we bring in Indigenous knowledge, mo'olelo or stories, and even examples from the past to explain weather in a deeper sense. I have driving questions that are included in these modules. And for this one, the driving question is, how does the knowledge of the moon phase connect to emergency management planning, which can ultimately set up a scenario that includes, at the very least, a space at the table for a Native person to be part of this discussion, but to also incorporate another worldview that can help explain weather in another fashion. We can go to module 8. In module 8, Hawaiian names and emergency management introduces the student to an Indigenous worldview that uses names to the wind to tell a story of conservation plans, management plans, and different worldviews that are used in understanding weather, disturbances, and dynamics, to also give solutions that were used from the past. So if you're looking at the curriculum in the link that was given to you, it goes much further than what is on the PowerPoint that is shown right now. The learning objectives for this module would be to participate in an activity that allows everyone to be inclusive and collaborative. It also allows each member to contribute to the team and to their community. So to bring their own agency. And that's important in times of disaster to actually have an actual case-by-case value incorporated into the management plan. It is also to reclaim identity. In my case, I'm Hawaiian, so it's to reclaim Hawaiian identity through understanding the winds, the moon phases, the directional points, the Hawaiian knowledge, the belief system, the philosophy and practices. It's also to perpetuate these Hawaiian foundations for our nation so that we can reclaim and reconceptualize our own identity in this day and age. It's also to understand how winds can contribute to the bigger picture of emergency management planning. The driving question can be, how does place-based identities connect to climate change? What kind of question is that? How can we contribute to answering these questions, which opens up a space to have more dialogue, discussing methodologies and possible solutions for climate change. So now we're getting a little academic in our critical analysis about how we can compare and contrast, and then how they can both complement each other in a discussion to find solutions for climate change. We can go to the next module. In module 9, it's all about the traditional sustainability practices and emergency management. So these slides really don't cover it. So I really request that you go to the curriculum that was given to you. Besides discussing both worldviews, the student does go out into the environment and is shown what it looks like in practice in such areas such as the lo'i, or the taro patch, the kahavai, or the stream, to understand the water flow, and the loko'i'a, which is the fish pond, also to understand fresh water and salt water. This allows one to be more mindful that both worldviews are science, not just one or the other, but both, and that converging them together can only help to understand the sciences in a bit better formation in understanding the weather. And so I only have 8 minutes, so I'm going to stop right now so that others can actually introduce their modules. If there are any questions, though, about the curriculum, the culture-based curriculum, please don't hesitate to either send the questions out to either myself or Julie, and I'll get back to you. Mahalo nui.
Thank you so much, Leslie. And I know Leslie has to jet off to another event, so extra appreciation for your time with us today. And so with that, we also have now, we're going to queue up a video from Hokulani Rivera, who is one of the other curriculum developers who is teaching right now, so could not be here with us in person. So she has set up this video to play for all of us. And so if we can get that going. Thanks, Calvin.
Aloha mai kākou, o Hokulani Rivera ko uinoa, he Hawaiiau mau mau, no paua o ahu mai au a ka noho au I Puyallup, Washington. Hello everyone, my name is Hokulani Rivera. I am Hawaiian forever and ever, and I'm originally from Paua Valley, Oahu, but currently live in Puyallup, Washington, on the ancestral homelands of the Puyallup and Muckleshoot tribes. And I also have the great fortune of working for the Muckleshoot tribe. Before I dive in, I want to give a shout out and a thank you to everyone who showed up to this event today, especially those who have supported us and who have loved us and cared for us throughout this journey, putting this curriculum together. This was a really huge project, and we really couldn't have done it without the support and the love that we received. So to dive in, Jasmine and I were a part of the team that created modules 1 through 3, where I took module 1, Jasmine took module 2, and we collabed on module 3. For module 1, I would say the intention behind that was to make known that the vulnerabilities that Indigenous communities have when it comes to global events like the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as more chronic issues that we might struggle with as communities, those vulnerabilities are systemic. They're not from a deficiency on Indigenous people's parts. They're not just happenstance. This has been orchestrated for hundreds of years by the colonial system that we know is the United States. So this process, and as you may see in the module, has been completed through historic laws as well as present laws, access to basic needs in Indigenous communities, and quite a lot of policing and jurisdiction issues. So that's the main focus for Module 1. But at the same time, the struggle for that module for me at the time was not wanting to pander to the idea that Indigenous communities or peoples were deficient in some way and were in need of saving. And for Native students to maybe struggle with all of the trauma that would be coming out in this module. Didn't want to do that, but at the same time, we need to bear witness, and sometimes we need to be reminded that other Indigenous communities might be facing things that we are unaware of, or that we might even have a privilege to be unaware of. So that was a huge struggle walking that line, and I hope it comes across that the intention is to look at the system rather than to bring out the traumatic stories. Although, of course, sometimes those things go hand in hand. But that's why for Module 3, we come back around to highlight Native initiatives from the language preservation efforts to the social distance powwow at the time, to just seed sovereignty, to so many things that are happening in our communities, as well as to highlight that the role of emergency management isn't to rebuild systems, isn't to aid Indigenous communities, but to assist the things that are already happening in our communities. So it has been an honor to be a part of this project, and I really wish I could be there, but thank you so much, everyone, for believing in us, and I hope you learned so much during this event. So thank you.
Well, it's beautiful having Hoku with us in the ways that work in our current time. So thank you so much to Hoku, and we will hand it over to Jasmine.
Thank you so much, Julie, and everybody else. I'm sorry if there's a little bit of background noise. I'm actually in kind of a busy area of my school at the moment. But if we want to go ahead and put those slides back up, we can kind of walk through the module a little bit. But first, Poso, hello, my name is Jasmine Niosh. I am an enrolled member of the Menominee Nation, and I'm currently calling in from the traditional homelands of the Anishinaabe, the Three Fires Confederacy of the Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Odawa. Presently, I'm a Juris Doctorate candidate at the University of Michigan Law School. One thing I think is good to highlight is that when both I and my colleague authored our module, we were actually both undergraduates. I was working on my Bachelor of Arts degree in public administration at the College of Menominee Nation in my traditional homelands in what is now Wisconsin. So in addition to some of what Hoku has already said and done a beautiful job of explaining, we really felt that in order to understand the underlying context of these emergencies that occur in tribal communities, it was really necessary to understand the history and the situations that exist when these emergencies occur. It's natural to kind of want to isolate things to a specific event and only look at those, but every community, especially Indigenous communities, already has a lot going on that is unique to those communities when these emergencies occur. And any work that happens post-emergency are not really going to be adequately informed unless you have all of this other context that kind of goes into it. So the idea here was that before we get to these beautiful place-based modules that were put together by Sierra and Leslie, we felt it was important to not assume that everyone who comes to the table is already aware of, for example, the complexity of Native nations or some of the issues that we face related to colonialism and impacts to our health and our cultural way of life before these things occur. So to give you an idea of the structure of modules 1 through 3, which were kind of meant to be an introduction in this way, The very first module, as Hoku mentioned, was a very like broad overview of the impacts of colonialism on Indigenous communities. So things like nutrition and healthcare, the importance of sovereignty, like what sovereignty actually is and what that looks like. As a law student, I'm finding out that tribal sovereignty in particular seems to be very difficult for some people to get their heads around. So we felt it was important to start off with a strong foundation before we moved into any of these more complex topics. And if you want to go to the next slide. So the second module, which is the one that I directly had my hand in, addresses the specific emergencies of climate change, COVID-19 community. So the idea here was that now that we've kind of laid this foundation about the historical context and about sovereignty and these big picture topics, to really look now at the effects of large environmental events on individual and community level issues. So even though we were zeroing in on climate change and COVID-19, these are essentially just two examples of the different types of emergencies that could face our community and how those might affect us. We then had to examine the role that individual and community level issues have on actually addressing those events, with the hope that you would be able to leave this module better understanding the intersections of environmental catastrophe and important factors like community health. So you want to go to the next one. And so for this last module, what we were essentially trying to do is just kind of bring all this together with kind of like the starting question of, okay, so we've had some catastrophe that has hit a tribal community. What is the actual emergency that we're dealing with? And so the idea here is that we would start building some foundational knowledge of ways in which Indigenous communities have led solutions on their own as these issues of climate change and COVID-19 and colonization and everything else kind of come up to show that, like, one, we have our agency, and then also there is a specific way that we deal with these issues when they emerge, giving kind of a contextual understanding of Indigenous relationships to place, which you really get to dive into in Sierra and Leslie's models, working on this idea of trust and what it actually means to build a partnership and a relationship with the Indigenous community so that you can work more effectively. Trust is not something that you just get and then you're done. It's something that has to be continually maintained, just like with any other relationship. And then also how to understand community resilience within this kind of like cultural context. And so to examine these issues, we looked at things like Indigenous languages, fire ecology, food sovereignty, energy sovereignty, self-determination as a way to kind of like show these broader issues. And throughout these modules, we have a series of activities that are kind of meant to help students explore what these actually look like in practice and on the ground, and also to kind of like test and further their understanding of Indigenous communities as they're working through. So I guess I'll just kind of leave it at that for now. As Julie mentioned, if there are any questions later on, I would be happy to field those. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. And I just want to emphasize too what Jasmine said earlier on. Her and Hoku were undergraduates when they're putting this together. And so I think there's probably many educators out there who are drooling at the thought of having undergraduates who could do this kind of work. It is truly phenomenal, and I think really starts to flip the script of understanding knowledge and expertise, and that we're looking across generations, from elders to our youth, and everyone in between for when we're tackling these issues. So huge gratitude to Jasmine and Hoku for this work. And we'll go on to Sierra now.
Tatsala inam wanakisa sapokis lidis costly appotent Sierra Green Kain Was Nimiipuu. Hello everybody, my name is Sierra Green. It's good to be here. Thank you Rising Voices and all those who have allowed us the space to share our curriculum with you all. It was an honor to work with the fine team that we've established to get this curriculum put together. I do hope that you all visit the curriculum that's available online. It's comprehensive and intact and very delves into the deep issues. So if we can pull up those slides, and I will just start going over the module 4 through 7, which I prepared regarding Nimiipuu. So Nimiipuu is what we call ourselves. We're more commonly known in the English language, or French really, as Nez Perce or Ne Perce. And the Nimiipuu, we've been known as one of the more prominent tribes throughout the Northwest of the United States. And our homeland span between Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming. And so with the large homelands and usual and accustomed areas, we have such a dynamic understanding of the ecosystems and how it's changed over time. But to begin, you know, and I love how we've been able to create these modules across from module 1 all the way through module 9. Starting out with, for this module series, is the place-based identities. And, you know, growing up, I always heard, you know, you don't know who you are unless you know where you've come from. And for us, we come from the land itself. And so we got to know the land to really know who we are as Nimiipuu. And through these modules 4 through 6, the place-based identity of the Nimiipuu is introduced to many of you who maybe not even have heard of Nimiipuu or Nez Perce before. So it's a really good starting point for most people, and even some of our own Nimiipuu, to go through this curriculum, which I've instituted in some of our classes, just to see, you know, kind of do a run through and see how it's received. So we also look at the historical and modern context of preparation and adaptation in response to hazards, and then the profound resilience of Nimiipuu that has continued for millennia. So over the course of these 3 modules, these are the things that are covered. All of the modules have kind of the same format. We have an exploration activity that really just opens the door to get folks thinking about, what do I already know, what do I want to know, and what am I going to learn? And this activity for this module is designed super interactive with videos, discussion, writing prompts, you know, throughout the whole module. Try to keep it engaging, because we've all been scholars at some point where we're just taking notes from a lecture, and you know, we're in a day and age where we can get a little bit more creative, and so definitely try to bring that out. And for me, you know, Nimiipuu, we're such a vibrant people and culture in our homelands, and if we're teaching this and I can't bring you here to go out to the river to feel the water and smell the air when the roots are coming up with the wet soil, you know, that experience, the next best thing is to show videos, and it has that sound and that the colors, and try to provide as much as we can of the Nimiipuu experience as possible. And so having these videos allow folks to start thinking about themes of place, identity, colonization, and resilience. So it's very multifaceted throughout. The Nimiipuu worldview is difficult to communicate through the text alone, and so you have to hear the language and start to understand that. So that's very much embedded throughout this module as well. Then there's an opening discussion, so students can share their video notes, their reflections and themes, and the common values. So, right, cultural values are so much important of who we are and where we come from. You know, we learn our values from the land itself. So, you know, it's continually scaffolding upon this first notion of the land base, and then who we are, and who we are comes from all of those things prior. So the place, the stories, the identity, the seasonal round, we're seasonal people, and turning into the elements: air, fire, land, water, and spirit. We cannot forget about spirit, which often Western science might do. You know, very much important part of who we are in understanding Nimiipuu place-based identities. And of course, the landscape has changed throughout, you know, the time the Earth has been here. And that's something that we honor and talk about and have continually adapted to. So the first module just tries to get a wraparound of who are these Nimiipuu people, and why do they have such this intricate and a little bit different understanding of this place that is called their homelands. And then it starts to unpeel and start to prompt folks to think about, what does that mean for emergency management? And so if you want to go to the next slide, Module 5 now starts to, like I said, scaffold into that Nimiipuu preparation and adaptation. You can see there the learning objectives of gaining appreciation for the historical and modern context of the elements. So I mentioned those, but thinking about climate change, floods, wildfires, and diseases. And so these are things that, you know, are nothing new, but that we've seen over time, millennia. So when you have stories that are thousands of years old, and you know, we have stories of adaptation through this as well, through these changes. And it's really important to start pointing out that, you know, this base of knowledge is has so much depth to it that, you know, we're still trying to understand even the depth of that knowledge, let alone the depth of the Western knowledge. So pairing these together, but really trying to point out that the Nimiipuu knowledge that has been standing for thousands of years is across our landscape, embedded into the geography and the geology of where we come from. And so as a sovereign nation, the Nez Perce tribe perpetuates the resilience of the Nimiipuu in their preparation and adaptation to modern hazards. We look at climate, and so the Nimiipuu are aware of climate imbalances on our homelands because we're attuned. We have attuned relationships with the land, specifically for food and medicinal sources. Me personally, I can say, you know, I'm always keeping track of how are the roots coming along? Is there still snow? Are they starting to come up? What are the birds doing to tell us about the salmon that are coming? Parts of our culture have evolved, of course, with the relationships of landscape, such as the language. So our language tells us about how a place is and what is supposed to be there. And if it's not there anymore, you know, what are we doing to manage and prepare ourselves to maintain that place as it is? You know, it's might seem a little arbitrary to some folks, but we don't name things after us. We're named after things. We want to embody those values and embody those characteristics. And that place itself, you know, has meaning and power. So we really try to honor our language in what does it tell us of places of the past and what it should be in the future. Thinking about the climate, of course, the floods. We've had historic floods, and we have stories of, many of you may be familiar with the Missoula floods. You know, we have stories of our folks surviving those because of prophecies of going to high ground and what happens when you don't listen to that spirit element. Wildfires, of course, throughout the Northwest are running rampant. Seems like every summer we're starting to experience more of that. But many of our legends, and for me personally, I have a really strong connection to beaver, and beaver and fire are connected, and many people don't understand that, and they're still connected today. And there's many scientific studies that are coming out talking about beaver and wildfire and their relationship. And we talk about disease as well, but for time's sake, I'll go on to the next slide and just briefly talk about Module 6, which leans on the Nimiipuu and our resilience. So you can read the learning objectives there, but in a nutshell, the multiple strands of resilience described in this module include formal initiatives in climate, COVID-19, food sovereignty and security, and education. And so the mere continued existence of Nimiipuu descendants is an embodiment of resilience. So my existence alone is an embodiment of resilience, which is based on the individual and the collective lived experiences of Nimiipuu since time immemorial, and is too immense to address in this module alone, but it is touched on all the previous modules. So as Jasmine and Hoku referred to, you know, it's not just talking about the difficulties and the challenges and the barriers, but all the successes and what can we learn from that when we start thinking about emergency management. And I'll just end with this quote. The earth, Wattis, has been fragmented, and thus Nimiipuu have been fragmented culturally, socially, and individually. Families are often in disarray. These are the soul wounds they suffer. So again, place-based people, we are Nimiipuu, we come from the land, and these impacts that we're seeing upon our landscape are a reflection of the impacts upon us as individuals and as families and as a society. And so bringing this curriculum forward, not only for the world to see, but for our own community is so important to continue to enhance our own cultural identity and say what we know and what we have is important as Nimiipuu people, and we think surely the world has a lot to learn from it as well. So it's been an honor to create this curriculum with the great team, and I appreciate the time to share that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sierra, and just setting that foundation and values that everything else must follow and grow upon. So thank you for highlighting the importance of when people are coming into this kind of work, of the considerations and context within which you're stepping into.